Hi, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about how to play Protection Paladin in the War Within. This video is going to focus on leveling dungeons and delves, since that is the content that will be available during the first few weeks of the expansion. Raids and Mythic Plus dungeons will come along later, and I will talk about them later. So let's get into it, but first don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's start with leveling. I am going to level as Retribution. Now, Protection Paladin is a very good leveling spec, arguably better than Ret, and it definitely works really well. You have tons of range damage options with Judgment and Avenger's Shield being able to hit enemies from a mile away. You have more range than Ret, actually, but it doesn't have the same powerful burst damage that Ret does, and I have the Legendary Axe, so this is my last chance to use it. I really didn't get to use it much during the expansion. I'm going to use it now. This is my talent setup for Ret, and I prefer Herald of the Sun, for reasons that I'll go into now. So Herald of the Sun and Templar work very similarly. They're both tied to Wake of Ashes. The difference really is that Herald of the Sun, when you press Wake of Ashes, it applies a bunch of damage to nearby enemies. Boom, done. One button and you're good. Templar requires you to Herald of the Sun and then make sure you have 5 Holy Power and then press the button again to cast Hammer of Light. There's a little bit more comboing and there's a lot more sustained damage going on in this tree. Just kind of a bit more fiddly, a lot more work. Probably better for raid damage. I don't know, I'm not a Ret Paladin genius, but probably better for sustained raid damage. That's not gonna matter while you're leveling. It's really all about just zipping around and killing guys super quick. Now, if I have a complaint about the Herald of the Sun tree, it's that there are a lot of good talents kind of buried in here on the left-hand side that otherwise this sort of left side, middle column aren't as great as the right-hand side for leveling in terms of just adding damage. So I'm going to take the right-hand side. It gives you crit chance. It gives you extra damage when you crit. It gives you a bit of extra chance to proc again and come down and just go down the right side to start out. But there are a couple of really good talents in here I want to highlight as well. Morningstar makes it so that your next Dawn Light, that is the main proc from casting Wake of Ashes, will do a bunch more damage. It stacks up very quickly if you're out of combat, so that has really, really good synergy with the whole leveling experience, so this is a really good talent for leveling. I think the Gleaming Ray is just giving you more Holy Power spender damage when Dawn Light is active is probably better for Mythic Plus and Raid, but we're not doing that, we're leveling. Additionally, Blessing of Anshe gives you a chance to just proc a triple damage triple damage Hammer of Wrath, good lord, and that you can use on a target even if they're not at low health. Man, that is so good. I love this. It was really fun to play with while leveling. I really, really am a big fan. The only real problem with it is that it's buried behind a heal, just a dumb old heal. So I don't necessarily want to make a beeline to it. I'll just really enjoy it once I get it. And then you get some very minor stuff, Solar Grace giving you haste while you have those Dawn Lights active, getting a 1 Divine Purpose proc every time you Wake of Ashes. Like the left and middle side of the tree really aren't great compared to the right, so it's going to be right, then left, then middle, and then I'll be level 80 and leveling will be over. Now, if you were to level as Prot, I think that would be fine. In that case, I would recommend leveling as Templar. You will get a lot more damage out of being a Templar than you will as a Lightsmith, particularly if you're leveling solo. If you have a leveling partner, if you have a buddy to constantly throw your Lightsmith armaments onto, then you can do that. And in that case, I would take the middle tree as Lightsmith, go through the middle, and basically just buff up all of the armament ally stuff. That's great. And then I would take the right tree, which is a lot more single target or personal damage oriented, Hammer and Anvil giving you some Judgment crit shockwave effect, Holy Power expenditure giving you Consecration AoE value. Like, there's some good stuff in the middle and right hand side of the Lightsmith tree, but I really would only play this if I'm gonna guarantee that I'm playing with somebody else. Templar is just gonna add more damage while leveling overall, and unfortunately I think that might be about the extent of when you're really gonna be able to enjoy Templar. So let's kind of talk about talents now. For Protection, this is the talent setup that I would be going with. One thing I didn't mention in leveling and talking about Ret is Crusader Aura. You do want to take that while you're leveling. Just turn that on and don't turn it off until you're done. And then other than that, I took Unbound Freedom and Lightforge Blessing while leveling. I thought those were really good and better than having like Blessing of Sacrifice for solo play. But for group content, having Blessing of Sacrifice is really good. You don't have to take Unbound Freedom. I think, you could do this setup where you take the standard Blessing of Protection, and it's just a very normal dungeon setup here. Blessing of Sacrifice and Protection. You have Avenging Wrath. I am taking both of the horses still. I think all of the early dungeons are still going to be pretty speedy, so having both of your horse talents is going to be good. And then other than that, it's just a very normal Prot Pally setup in the left-hand tree, and also in the right-hand tree. I have taken Spell Wording, which you may not need for normal dungeons, but it's good to have just in case you do, and the same goes for Sentinel. If you don't feel that you're having any defensive issues at all, you can just take Avenging Wrath Might, give yourself some more crit chance, but if you feel that you're struggling defensively at all, stick with Sentinel, stick with all of these standard talents set up on the right-hand side, things like Strength and Adversity for a massive parry increase, Gift of the Golden Valkyr for those occasional reactive Guardian of Ancient Kings procs, and then just Bulwark of Righteous Fury and Most Light, Final Stand, Righteous Protector, all of the usual prop pally stuff that makes it really, really strong in those AoE tanking situations. Alright, now I'll talk about the rotation for Paladin, and the fundamentals of the Paladin rotation are to maintain Consecration, keep Avenger Shield and Judgment on cooldown, and use Hammer of Wrath whenever it's available. After that, you want to spend the majority of your holy power on Shield of the Righteous. You can cast Word of Glory on yourself as a heal if needed, or on other people, I suppose. Just try to make sure that no one dies. Once you've got all of that covered, you can use Blessed Hammer as your filler. Alright, so I said this in the pre-patch guide, and I'm saying it again now. I haven't updated this section of the guide since Legion, and that's because nothing has changed with the class. It's the same as it ever was. Maintaining both Shield of the Righteous and Consecration while tanking is super important for staying alive. It's your number one priority, really. You never want to let Holy Power overcap it. It's better to use Shield of the Righteous and overcap a little bit of your Shield of the Righteous uptime than it is to waste Holy Power. Spending Holy Power reduces the cooldowns on most of your major offensive and defensive cooldowns, so building and spending it as quickly as you can, all of the time, is pretty much always the correct approach. Now, as for cooldowns, you have a couple of really good offensive cooldowns and a big batch of amazing defensive cooldowns. Avenging Wrath is your primary offensive and defensive cooldown. Usually you're going to be spec'd into Sentinel, as I mentioned, in dungeons, and as Sentinel it grants damage reduction, max health, and increased holy power generation and increased damage. Eye of Tyr is a 45-second cooldown that deals a big burst of AoE damage and grants 25% damage reduction, which is also pretty good. It only lasts for 6 seconds now, but it's still very good for establishing threat at the start of pulls. Divine Toll is an amazing AoE burst damage skill that is great for locking up threat at the start of pulls or interrupting multiple casters at once with a single global cooldown. Many times you can do both of those things at the same time. Go into a pull, there's a bunch of casters, you hit Divine Toll, they're all now silenced and on you. Now let's talk about defensive cooldowns. You have Ardent Defender, which is your first lifeline in terms of defensive cooldowns. It is a combination of like a minor defensive cooldown and a sort of active cheat death mechanic, so it's really effective, and it also gets a bunch of cooldown reduction from Resolute Defender, so the actual average cooldown is more like 80 seconds or so. You have Guardian of Ancient Kings. It is a very straightforward shield wall effect. You just want to use it to mitigate a lot of damage. You also have Blessing of Sacrifice, which is an external cooldown you can use on other players, and it is just very effective at keeping people in your group alive. There's also Blessing of Protection. This is similarly useful for putting onto other people. It can be used to clear physical damage debuffs from yourself or to protect other players who are being fixated, for example, but it will set the target's threat to 0 while it's active, so it's not something you want to put on yourself 99.9% of the time. If you do use it on yourself to, say, clear a bleed, you'll want to be sure to use a Cancel Aura macro, and as I have said in the past, I'll put one of those on the screen right now. It needs to say /Cancel Aura Blessing of Protection and /Cancel Aura Divine Shield. You want both of those in the same macro, but they need to be on separate lines, and that way you can use that one macro to clear a debuff and then quickly remove either of those without anyone getting auto-attacked and killed. Then there's also Blessing of Spellwarding, which will make the target immune to spell damage and prevent magic effects from being applied to the target. Unlike Blessing of Protection, it can't be used to clear magic debuffs that are already on a target. It has to be precast to immune those initial applications before the debuff goes on. It also doesn't zero the target's threat, so you can use it on yourself and keep tanking. You also have Lay on Hands, which is super self-explanatory, and it's just an instant full heal. And then finally, lastly, you have Divine Shield. Now, because of Resolute Defender, the cooldown on it is more like 2.5 minutes rather than the default of 5, and you are also able to maintain threat throughout having it active due to Final Stand. You are immune to damage while it's active, you have established AoE threat, it is just an absolutely insane defensive cooldown, and the fact that it is available more often than every 3 minutes is completely insane. Strongest cooldown in the game, available super often. It's crazy. Alright, now let's talk about how to pull on a Protection Paladin. You can precast some Blessed Hammers to generate Holy Power before a pull. This will allow you to cast Shield of the Righteous as soon as you're in melee range. It is something I like to do pretty much all the time. As for actually pulling, you want to open with Avenger Shield to establish AoE threat and dominance. This is usually all you need. But depending on your cooldowns, you can use Avenging Wrath and kind of throw in some extra burst damage. You can use Eye of Tyr, you can use Divine Toll, just depending on what the pull looks like and what cooldowns are available. Your main goals in the start of a pull are to get in there, get Consecration down and on the ground, and get Shield of the Righteous up and preventing damage from coming in. In general, it's really simple. Avenger Shield does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to establishing AoE threat, and Shield of the Righteous is there to pick up the rest of the slack. In terms of stats, Strength is the most important stat available to Prot Pallies, so you always want to maximize your item level on armor. You will want to enchant and gem for haste, and the Mastery will be your second best secondary stat generally due to how it increases your block chance, which works against auto attacks, but also spell damage and spell damage over time thanks to Holy Shield. Versatility and crit are both also very good. All stats are pretty good for Prot Pally, but for gemming I would do Haste Mastery, enchants I would do Haste, and then for gear I would just wear whatever the highest item level options I have are. Okay, let's wrap things up. Prot Pally is in pretty good shape heading into the War Within. It was great throughout Dragonflight, and while there is a bit of concern from the community that it might struggle in the coming expansion, particularly due to some self-healing issues, I'm not fully convinced. If anything, I'm more concerned that Lightsmith will be much stronger than Templar, but fairly boring. I think that's a legitimate concern. It is a very good group cooldown, but it's really not all that fun, so I do think that Pally is going to be pigeonholed into playing Lightsmith, even though I don't really think I like it as much as Templar. I know that it is better for dungeon play. So Pally, still pretty good. Worst thing to ever happen to it is that it's boring for a little while. What a charmed life they lead. Must be tough. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.